The New California Republic Army, or NCRA, is the largest army in the post-war wasteland of the United States, and indeed potentially the entire world. Modelled on the United States Army of old, the NCRA is a multifaceted military force uniquely designed to handle the challenges of the post-war world. In this video, we'll be analysing the hierarchy of its military, as well as the various branches stemming from the NCRA. At the absolute top of the New California Republic Army is their Commander-in-Chief, the President of the New California Republic. As of 2281, the current holder of this position is Aaron Kimball. In comparison to past presidents, Kimball himself was originally a soldier within the NCRA, eventually rising all the way to the position of general. Having taken a hardline approach to hostile raider tribes during his military career, Kimball was highly popular with the citizens of the NCR, who had dubbed him the hero of the Mojave. Capitalizing on his military success, Kimball retired from his position within the military and sought election within the NCR Senate, eventually being voted in as a representative of the hub. Within the same year, Kimball ousted the former President Wendell Peterson in a vote of no confidence, becoming the 5th president of the NCR within the space of 2 months in politics. Kimball's ascension to the role of president marks a dramatic shift in the culture and ideology of the NCR itself. While previous presidents have been commander-in-chief before, Kimball was the first to come from a purely military background. The more diplomatic approaches of the NCR to expand and acquire territory gave way to Kimball's new approach, which some have labelled as warhawkish. Under Kimball, the New California Republic Army has never been more important, but it could be argued that the emphasis on the militancy of the NCR has begun to erode the democratic values that it was built on. Kimball is described as having a stiff, autocratic style of leadership, and has little compunction on the annihilation of non-combatant groups or the severe loss of NCR life in the Mojave, so long as it gets results. If you could summarise Kimball, one of his key admirers is ironically one of his greatest foes, Caesar, who applauded Kimball's aggressive and autocratic stance but disparages the limitations he placed on himself being elected democratically. Within the New California Republic Army, the position of general is the highest office one can attain, seemingly the equivalent of a 5-star general. The current general of the NCR, General Lee Oliver, is responsible for the overall strategy and direction of the entire army itself, which naturally coincides with the will of President Aaron Kimball. Being the commanding officer of the largest post-war army in the known world, the general is an incredibly powerful role to possess. However, the complete authority over the NCR military could be argued to cause problems within the military itself. General Oliver is considered by many to not be a particularly brilliant tactician, with his own troops labelling him as General Wait and See. Others claim that he owes his position purely thanks to President Kimball. General Oliver disregards sound advice from peers purely for the sake of his own ego. He begrudges Chief Hanlon and his Rangers for being credited for winning the first Battle of Hoover Dam, rather than just being happy that his forces were not eliminated in battle. As such, he purposely places Hanlon and his forces in tactically unadvantageous positions purely to do the opposite of what Hanlon recommended. Instead, General Oliver intends to mass troops at Hoover Dam to crush the Legion in a titanic battle to gain popularity and praise from the people of the NCR. The issue is that pulling all these forces to one spot has left the NCR forces across the Mojave dangerously under-resourced and undermanned, which has allowed the Legion and other hostiles to gain footholds across the region and undermine the war effort. All in all, the general is the final say within the NCR military itself, having command over the entire armed forces, for good and for bad. Beyond this, General Oliver is also the direct commanding officer of the NCR Heavy Troopers. Considered his personal shock troops, NCR Heavy Troopers are equipped with salvage power armor and the very best weaponry, fulfilling the role of heavy infantry in the NCR. However, they are somewhat underutilized given the fact that they are Oliver's personal troops. The bulk of them are stated to be safe in NCR territory, protecting the interest of Brahmin barons rather than on the front lines with conscripted troops. However, they are slowly allocated to the Mojave front as the war begins to ramp up. In a level directly underneath the general is a brigadier general, which could be comparable to a 2 or 3-star general in the real world. The only mention of this particular office stems from cut post-game content. Conversation with Colonel Moore can be found, in which he states that due to the successful pacification of foes prior to the NCR's victory at the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, she had been promoted to Brigadier General. The next rank in the NCR's chain of command is Colonel. There are 3 colonels that are able to be found within Fallout New Vegas, being Colonel Shu, Colonel Moore, and Colonel Royez. Despite being the same military rank, Colonel Shu has more authority than Colonel Moore, as he is the commander of all the NCR Army operations in the Mojave, whereas Colonel Moore has ownership of the garrison station at Hoover Dam itself. Colonel Royez is only able to be found if nukes have been launched on the Long 15. However, he appears to be stationed in the area, coordinating the key supply line between the NCR and the Mojave. Colonels are the highest respected officers in the NCR Army, outside of the generals, and are entrusted with an extremely large amount of responsibility. They're responsible for the administration of the Army itself, allocating troops, commissioning orders, and coordinating the movement and location of the Army itself. In contrast to the Centurions of Caesar's Legion, colonels do not undertake any actual fighting. Their years of experience are invaluable to the NCRA, and they're largely kept away from the front lines. That being said, they are extremely accomplished fighters in their own right. Colonel Moore laments that she's stuck behind a desk, rather than continuing to fight as an NCR Ranger. Colonel Shu shows no fear when a Legion-aligned courier declares their intent to assassinate him. Even Colonel Royez is the only member of the NCR Army to wear actual power armor. Interestingly, there isn't one simple personality type that fits the mold for being a colonel. Colonel Shu is widely respected amongst his troops, and it's an open secret that the only reason he never made it to general is due to political maneuvering of President Kimball and General Oliver, with favour instead falling on Colonel Moore. As stated by lead developer Josh Sawyer, Kimball is a war hawk, as are Moore and Oliver. Colonel Shu is a much more sympathetic person and diplomatic officer. As such, he doesn't really fit into Kimball's frontline operations. Reporting directly to an allocated colonel, majors are field officers who command a unit of officers and soldiers. They hold responsibility for their training, status, and the management of their equipment, and are typically deployed to hold command over a particular location for the NCRA. The locations themselves can vary immensely, however. Major Knight administers the Mojave Outpost, the HQ for travelers to and from the NCR to the Mojave. Being away from frontline combat, his days are largely spent on purely admin, such as logging the amount of traffic at the Mojave Outpost rather than combat matters. On the other hand, Major Pilati commands Camp Forlorn Hope, one of the worst postings in the entire theatre of war between the NCR and Caesar's Legion. Major Pilati is faced with handling crisis after crisis, constant loss of soldiers, low supplies of food, water and equipment, and the daily stress that today might be the day the Legion invades the camp. In contrast, Major Elizabeth Kieran is a semi-exception to the role, as she's stationed in Freeside with the intent of using soft power to sway locals to be sympathetic to the NCR's cause. As such, she sends envoys to the King's Gang and works alongside the followers of the Apocalypse to try to improve the situation in Freeside. Majors essentially are tasked with actioning the orders given to them by colonels on a more frontline basis, typically being the commanding officer in the field rather than being behind the safety of a headquarters. Beneath the majors of the NCR, the next step would be a captain. Captains in the NCRA report directly to either a major or a colonel and are given command over a company of soldiers of their own. Their style of command can differ, however. As an example, Captain Gillies and Captain Pappas are commanding officers for their own base of operations, being Bitter Springs and the NCR Embassy respectively. In these locations, they're responsible for logistics, patrols, supply lines, and making sure reinforcements arrive. Meanwhile, although being located at Camp McCarran to shore up its defences, Captain Curtis is the commander of Bravo Company, who ostensibly are allocated to wherever they are needed most, rather than occupying a singular location as their own base of operations. Captain Parker is the exception to all this, as he does not appear to have any troops that report directly to him. Instead, he administers the Aerotech refugee camp, with the assistance of non-NCR operatives such as the followers of the Apocalypse. Similar to Major Kieran, Captain Parker's role instead appears to be more a focus on soft power, assisting locals and NCR residents that are down on their luck to elicit support for the NCR itself. The next step would be that of a lieutenant, or for the English people in the audience, lieutenant. The rank of lieutenant is the lowest for commissioned officers in the NCR Army. However, there are different ranks within the role itself, consisting of either a first or second lieutenant. Lieutenant Haggerty is given command of the garrison located at Helios 1, in a somewhat caretaker position, given the fact that the base is away from the front lines and they're unable to generate any strategic power from the site at the time. Similar to this, Lieutenant Hayes is tasked with containing the Powder Gang and Thread and Prim, but is able to coordinate troops to take control of the town itself if annexed by the NCR. Lieutenant Boyd reports directly to Colonel Shue at Camp Buchanan and is tasked with policing the camp itself. However, given the dire state of the region, she's also responsible for tracking AWOL and missing soldiers, inventory, as well as the interrogation of captured prisoners of war, such as Kinturi and Sealoose. Beneath this is the role of Second Lieutenant, the main difference being that these officers do not command from a singular location, but are instead allocated to different bases as needed. Second Lieutenant Gorobets is an officer in one of the finest combat battalions of the NCR, the 1st Recon. Leading Alpha Team, Gorobets commands an elite team of sharpshooters who are tasked with special operations by the NCR. 1st Recon itself is still within the standard operating line of the NCR Military, however, and reports directly to their local commanding officer, be it a major or a colonel, rather than answering to their own leaders, such as the NCR Rangers. Before moving on to the non-commissioned officer forces of the NCR Army, I thought it might be a good segue to mention other components of the NCR Army that are slightly outside of the command structure, the main one being the NCR Rangers. Rangers originally were an independent organisation in the Wasteland, being part commando, sheriff and scout all rolled up into one. However, they were amalgamated into the NCR Army in 2271, formally joining the rank-and-file troops of the Republic. Although they technically do operate under the same strict chain of command as regular troops, an NCR Ranger stationed at Camp Buchanan technically would report to Colonel Shue. The lines do become a bit blurry since Rangers are given a huge amount of freedom to carry out their duties. NCR Rangers can almost be considered to be on loan when they're stationed under the command of other officers in the NCR, with their true allegiance to the chain of command being within their own division. This freedom also tends to extend to them being far more tolerant in their recruitment. Sexism is not an issue at all within the Rangers, with women being given equal opportunity to rise through their ranks. However, interspecies racism is seen to be a non-factor within the Rangers, as ghouls and even super mutants are able to be given a place within their ranks if they're capable enough. Rangers appear to have 3 distinct ranks: regular Rangers, who are often found among NCR troops to give them a bit of a backbone, veteran Rangers, who are considered to be the very best troops in the entire NCR, and the highest tier belonging to the Chief, who in the current day is Chief Hanlon. Given that the Rangers are a semi-independent area of the NCR Army, it's hard to define where Hanlon rests on the chain of command. However, given the fact that he can communicate directly with General Oliver and even President Kimball, I'd consider him to be resting alongside the ranks of colonels in terms of his position within the NCR Army as a whole. Back within the formal army structure, the next rank would be that of a sergeant. A sergeant will typically report to a lieutenant or captain, but is given command or sub-command over a squadron of troops. The role of sergeant has many differences, however, which typically correspond to the fact that there are different ranks of the role itself. Master Sergeant, First Sergeant, and regular sergeants are non-commissioned field officers in charge of direct combat operations. They will often fight alongside their troops in engagements and lead them directly. Sergeant McCready states that he could have been promoted years ago, but he loathes the bureaucratic staleness of roles outside of the field, stating that he didn't join the army to drive a desk. That being said, 2 roles within the sergeant ranks are less combat orientated, being the role of Staff Sergeant and Technical Sergeant. The former is tasked largely with the discipline and obedience of troops, with orders to flog soldiers for desertion and other misconducts. Technical sergeants, such as Rays, do not command any squadrons, but instead focus on a singular combat-related task, namely communication and radio equipment utilised by the army itself. The next step would be a corporal. Within the NCR, a corporal is the lowest rank for non-commissioned officers. Although they can be given the role of a squad leader over a small group such as Corporal Mags, many have no direct reports and are instead denoted to the rank of corporal to display their seniority to the other troops. As an example, Corporal Sterling and Betsy are part of 1st Recon but don't hold any direct command over fellow troops such as 10 of Spades. Corporals will therefore report typically to a lieutenant or even a sergeant in the chain of command. And finally, we have the privates. Although there are private first classes, all privates are considered more or less equal in the NCR Army, being equally at the bottom of the pile. At the time of Fallout New Vegas, privates in the NCR Army are in a precarious position given the ramping war against Caesar's Legion and the toll it's begun to take on the NCR itself. Although many privates are volunteers, the NCR does practice conscription, with men and women pressed into service within the military, sometimes against their own will. As such, this can lead to large problems concerning morale, given the fact that some troopers never wish to join the war in the first place. This is also compounded with the large lack of support given to privates within the army itself. Privates will either come from the ranks of volunteers or conscripts. Volunteers typically come from farming, ranching, or more frontier locations and are typically trained to handle firearms from a young age. Conscripts, on the other hand, can often be city-based citizens and are less prepared for life in the army. Basic training only tends to focus on the bare minimum for military skills, with said training only running for about as short a time as 2 weeks before the troops are sent directly to a theatre of war. Now this can be a recipe for disaster. Privates with only 2 weeks of training will break easily in the face of chemmed up raiders, radioactive monsters, or Roman cosplaying slavers. Many of the troops stationed for the Battle of Hoover Dam are instructed to simply throw their rifles off the side of the dam if the enemy closes in on them, rather than standing and fighting to the end. In locations such as Camp Fallen Hope, some privates pilfer their own camp's medicine supplies to deal with the horrors they face on a daily basis. A former sergeant in the NCR lamented the treatment of privates, stating that they're not even issued body armor for combat duty. Instead, they're outfitted in simple cloth and leather armor. She decided to quit when she was instructed to flog 2 troops for desertion. However, they'd only been late for roll call since they'd gotten drunk on the strip, and possessed little concept of army expectations, given the fact that 2 weeks previous they'd just been civilians. Essentially, privates are the foot soldiers of the NCR. Those who succeed can find themselves promoted quite rapidly. Colonel Moore states she joined at 16 and became a commissioned officer by the age of 17. However, those that don't succeed perish, and in such large numbers that the NCR is estimated to lose 1,000 troops every year in the Mojave campaign alone. What privates lack in consistency, however, they make up for in numbers, given the fact that it is they who populate the NCR Army to the point that it's considered the largest post-war army in the known world. If I could link it to Warhammer 40k, privates in the NCR Army are basically the Imperial Guard, with the battle doctrine being, when in doubt, throw more men at it. And that is each of the ranks within the NCR Army as a whole. For the sake of the video, I tried to keep on track to formal roles within the army itself, rather than focusing on the entire military. As such, I didn't give much mention to different departments within the NCR Military, ranging from mechanized companies, military police, supported medical units, and even the NCR's Air Force. However, please let me know if you'd be interested in any of these, and I can cover them for a future video. If you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.